For better or worse, building hype is the keystone of marketing strategy for any video game. Teasing gamers through a game's development, releasing new trailers, teasers, demos, and screenshots, all in an effort to build enough anticipation for potential players to explode come launch day. And this is why it's also very easy for a game to become controversial. If it's anything less or even just different than players expected, then you can bet social media and message boards will be lighting up with hot takes, arguments, calls for class action lawsuits, and because we can't have nice things, sometimes even threats of violence. But you know what, we're in the year of 2022, and sometimes when you go back and revisit these air quotes controversial games, you'll find that they're actually pretty bloody decent. So let's take a look at them. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 controversial video games you must play, or at least try, in 2022. Number 10. Syndicate 2012. The original Syndicate, released in 1993, was an isometric tactics and strategy game. Set in a dystopian cyberpunk future where corporations have replaced governments, the player controls a team of cybernetically enhanced agents performing missions ranging from warfare, assassination, extortion, corporate espionage, and more. And you use the funds and corporate secrets that you steal to expand your territory across the globe. It was unique and complex. But the Syndicate that we're talking about today, released in 2012, was none of those things. Syndicate 2012 is a first-person shooter telling a linear story through a typical level-by-level structure. It's a drastic departure from the complex mechanics of the original, and this version consists almost entirely of shooting and running forward. However, it was developed by Starbreeze Studios, one of the best when it came to innovating the FPS genre. The combat was fast, responsive, and satisfying. By combining acrobatic maneuvers and unique high-tech weaponry, it felt closer to a Matrix game than any official Matrix game had ever gone. And surprisingly, the game even featured an excellent 4-player cooperative multiplayer mode inspired by the original game. If you can put aside your nostalgia and treat it as something new, then Syndicate 2012 is an excellent shooter that is well worth your time. Number 9. Elder Scrolls Online. When Elder Scrolls Online was first announced, a lot of fans of the traditionally single-player games felt let down. For years they've been asking for multiplayer Elder Scrolls, and when developer Bethesda Softworks finally delivered, it was, underwhelming to say the least. The game just looked as generic as an MMO can get, and nothing like the traditional Elder Scrolls game. Before launch, the developers sought to please fans as much as possible, adding in a first-person mode, the way that most people play these games, but that unfortunately wasn't enough. For fans of the Elder Scrolls lore, it was an even bigger disappointment, taking one of the weirdest and most unique settings in gaming and making it a straightforward good versus evil fantasy story. Fortunately, MMOs are one of the few genres where developers can respond to fans. Through updates and expansions, Elder Scrolls Online has become not only one of the most accessible yet vast games in the genre, but has also explored deep corners of the lore that the main series has barely mentioned in passing. For any fan of the series, it's almost a must-play in 2022, and it's hard to imagine ever getting to explore this world this deeply again. Number 8. Cyberpunk 2077. Now, a lot has been written about Cyberpunk 2077's notoriously catastrophic release. It was one of the most ill-advised, premature game releases ever, being so broken and buggy on prior generations of consoles that it was barely playable. But if you're one of the lucky ones to snag one of the new consoles or graphics card during our never-ending chip shortage, then Cyberpunk is absolutely worth your time. Not only have all the major bugs been fixed, but developers CD Projekt Red have even expanded upon the game with new loot, missions, player housing, and much more. It also hosts an incredibly beautiful and atmospheric setting that reacts to your actions. The futuristic Night City feels real, with a design that makes sense and can be exploited. The game rarely directs you or holds your hand, and you can truly approach just about any situation any way you want. And you might actually even have a chance of pulling it off. Well, unless it was just a bad idea in the first place, but that's on you. Number 7. Mass Effect Andromeda. Now, there are going to be a few games on this list that I just don't like. That's completely fine, but I have to commend games that have gone back and have tried to fix things for the betterment of the fan base. And I have to concede that Mass Effect Andromeda today, compared to when it first released, is in a much better state. Because this is the thing, mismanagement, lack of direction, and a burned out staff resulted in a mostly playable but still buggy in a lot of places, but definitely ugly looking game. By the time developer BioWare was able to correct these issues, much of the damage had been done, resulting in publisher EA making the decision to put the whole franchise on hiatus. Which is a shame because while Andromeda was far from perfect, it still held some solid gameplay design. It took the boring exploration elements of the original trilogy and actually made them engaging, all while improving on the combat of Mass Effect 2 and 3 to be faster paced and more mobile without sacrificing playability. It definitely is still in the doldrums when it comes to its story, but in terms of the moment-to-moment gameplay, yeah, yeah, it's pretty fun. Number 6. Batman Arkham Origins. For some reason, Batman Arkham Origins has practically been relegated to non-canon amongst the Arkham games, even being excluded from the Arkham Collection, a remastered package that included every other game in the series. Sure, it was developed by a different team and felt a little bit jankier than the main 3 games, but even that was barely noticeable. Its only major flaw was the infamous Shock Gloves gadget, a pair of electrified gauntlets that made the combat almost effortlessly easy. But anyone who never played Origins missed out on a truly solid game that takes place in Batman's early days, which are arguably his most interesting. Origins is ultimately the origin story of the relationship between Batman and the Joker, as they go from simple enemies to, in the Joker's mind at least, soulmates. Origins may lack a trivial amount of polish compared to the main series, but it has by far some of the best writing and one of the best Joker portrayals in any medium. Number 5. Final Fantasy XIII 2. Developer Square Enix had high expectations for Final Fantasy XIII, touting a revamped combat system and an aesthetic inspiration from Final Fantasy VII, easily the most popular entry in the long-running franchise. Not to mention stellar graphics, Square were very confident that it would perform spectacularly, but it did not. Fans were let down by its extreme linearity, a departure from the expansive worlds the games were known for, and on top of that, the characters were dull, the villains unmemorable, and the story borderline incomprehensible. So it's a shame that its direct sequel addressed most of these issues, but performed even worse. Ironically, by using one of the most convoluted plot devices ever, that being time travel, the writers effectively retconned most of the story, making it a much more straightforward tale about trying to avert a bleak future. The combat was expanded upon and included a new system to befriend the series' many iconic monsters to fight with you, and it gave us one of the series' most underrated and sympathetic villains, a time traveler crossing the multiverse in an effort to find a timeline where his dead one true love is alive. Consequences to the laws of time and space be damned. Number 4. Fallout 76. Now again, this is a game that I do not like in the slightest, but I have to accept that there have been significant improvements made to it. Admittedly, when I went back on a few months ago to try and play this recently, it was still a bit of a broken mess, but at least I got through the opening title sequence, so that's a huge market improvement. Anyway, we all know that Fallout 76 has had one of the most historically disastrous launches ever, from the game not working, majorly lacking in overall content, and the company unable to deliver on exclusive merch for those who pre-ordered. 76 was rightfully written off as a train wreck. But fast forward to 2022, however, and Fallout 76 has been improved so much that it's almost unrecognizable. The world has been populated with NPCs, the dialogue options, the lack of which were a sore spot for Fallout players, has been expanded drastically, and the game is now packed with content. While updates for the game have definitely slowed, anyone jumping in now has a new full-blown Fallout to enjoy, which is rather good because Fallout 5, well, it ain't coming anytime soon. Number 3. Resident Evil 6. Now, Resident Evil 6 got a lot of well-deserved derision upon release. After Capcom reinvented the series with Resident Evil 4, fans were alarmed when Resident Evil 5 began crossing into territory that can only be described as very, very silly. And I hope right now that my editor is putting up the visual image of Chris punching a boulder into a volcano. Fans were even more crestfallen when Resident Evil 6 threw all semblance of its tone and themes out of the window and went full-on insane. The story jumps between numerous characters and gameplay styles, from horror to shooter to whatever fighting zombies with superpowered karate is, but it was also pretty intense. The entire series up to that point had played out very much like a B horror movie, but Resident Evil 6 was like if Fast and the Furious was directed by The Room's Tommy Wiseau. Then add some monsters, some of which were the size of buildings. Now that the series has been course corrected by the excellent Resident Evil 7 and RE Village, you can go back to 6 and enjoy it for the big, exceedingly dumb ride that it is. Put it on easy, grab a friend for co-op or controller passing, and just enjoy the show. Number 2. Far Cry Primal. Far Cry Primal was always going to be a tough sell. Taking a series known for its guns, vehicles, gadgets, and explosions and transporting it to a prehistoric setting certainly made fans scratch their head. Even stretching what people could have been capable of at the time, your arsenal is still mostly boiled down to sticks and rocks. At release, it was pretty much what was expected. The concept didn't totally come together, and it was largely considered a novel experiment at best and a cheap cash-in at worst. Throw in the fact that it recycled the map from Far Cry 4, and some fans were understandably pretty upset. But later, developers developer Ubisoft released a new survival mode which completely transformed the game into arguably what it should have been all along. Stripped of various HUD elements, facing a more physically taxing environment with deadlier predators, and working with much fewer resources to craft weapons and items, Primal became a very different game entirely. Everything about how you play on survival changes, causing you to pace yourself and pick your battles more carefully. You learn the map better, like where to avoid predators and enemy tribe patrols. You're no longer playing in a low-tech Far Cry, but instead you are experiencing something wonderfully new. And number 1, DMC Devil May Cry. When Capcom rebooted their beloved and long-running Devil May Cry series in 2013, fans revolted. Not only was the entire continuity wiped clean, but so too were the characters. Their names were still the same, but their looks and personalities were completely different. Dante, the snowhead anime bad boy that fans had grown so attached to, now looked more like a young Morrissey, and as a result they were not interested. The experiment was considered a massive failure, and Capcom pivoted back to continuing the original series. However, those of us who did play it found an action game every bit as solid as its predecessors. The vaguely biblical story was made even darker and projected onto a tapestry of US politics of the time, even resulting in a mission where you're basically fighting a demonic Bill O'Reilly of Fox News. But now that fans have gotten what they wanted with Devil May Cry 5, there's really no good reason to go back and check out the game they derided so much. But taken as a brief historical tangent or a what-if indie-style movie, there's very little not to enjoy. And there we go, my friends. Those were 10 controversial video games you must play in 2022. Hope you enjoyed that, and please let me know what you thought about it down in the comment section below. As always, I've been Jules. You can go follow me over on Twitter at RetroJ, but the O is a 0, or you can swing by Instagram where it's the same handle. As always, I've been Jules. You have been awesome. Never forget that, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.